Hello ladies and gentlemen, it's Young here and welcome to a Metal Gear Solid 5 news update. I've finally gotten around to reading the 20-page Metal Gear Solid 5 article on GameInformer's latest issue, and I've got tons of new information to share. Keep in mind that I'll only be sharing details related to the game, so if you want to find out stuff about Kojima and his approach to development and stuff like that, be sure to check out the magazine. Anyways, without further ado, let's dive right into it. Let's begin by talking a bit about Ground Zeroes. The premise is pretty well known by now, so I'm gonna skip that. But one thing that Kojima did clarify was that soldiers within Camp Omega are actually US Marines and not XOF soldiers, and that the two aren't necessarily working together. The US Marines are simply there because their superiors commanded them to, while Skullface and his XOF unit are there for their own agenda. After doing their business, the entire unit actually leaves via chopper, as witnessed in Ground Zeroes' intro cutscene, leaving only the US Marines to guard the base. So ideally, Snake would not want to kill these soldiers since they are US Marines and not the enemy Zoff unit, but in the end, whether players decide to kill these soldiers is up to them. The magazine then proceeded to talk about gameplay, reiterating that there are multiple ways to infiltrate Camp Omega, whether it be through lethal means, non-lethal means, or a combination of both. The magazine also talked about various gameplay features like the binocular's ability to track targets from long distances, the wider and more unpredictable routes of enemy patrol, the new iDroid device, the game's new aiming system with bullet drop, a D-pad based inventory system, Snake's ability to use any firearm within the game world on the spot, and lots of other things that have already been confirmed before. Oh, and speaking of the iDroid, the article reiterated that players can use tablets as a second screen device to replace the in-game iDroid device, offering players the ability to listen to audio files, view mission information, and see markers and waypoints without having to bring up the device in-game. Furthermore, Kojima also teased that in the Phantom Pain, this second screen functionality would allow players to progress elements of the game while away from the consoles, likely referring to managing the Outer Heaven base through the tablets. Now, something new that the article confirmed is the fact that there will be no more camo index in Metal Gear Solid 5, forcing players to use common sense more than anything else. The removal of camo index makes sneaking more difficult, which is another one of many reasons why the reflex mode feature was added. Also, to compensate for the removal of camo index is a 360 degrees detection meter similar to Far Cry 3's, which becomes brighter and brighter in the direction of guards as they come closer to spotting Snake. And with the right conditions, glare from light sources will also serve a similar purpose. Alongside the camo index, also removed from the game is the alert timer. Once detected, players will have to rely on things like intercepted radio chatter and keen observation to discern enemy alert status, further enhancing immersion. Making a return is Snake's ability to hold enemies up at gunpoint, which seems to come with its own set of dialogue based on this screenshot. Furthermore, once again Snake can chokehold enemies, and this time Snake automatically pockets them as soon as they're grabbed. Once grabbed, players have a variety of options. They can either interrogate, knock out, or kill the helpless guard. Interrogating now has some dialogue options as well, allowing players to force the guard to attract nearby patrol or to ask for information related to the mission or the location of ammo and secret passages. It is essentially an enhanced version of a familiar CQC gameplay mechanic from past games. The article also discussed various other already known CQC abilities, like the ability to steal weapons and use Peace Walker's multiple CQC system. The article then proceeded to discuss vehicles, which according to them, does take some getting used to, especially since these are large vehicles with a poor turning radius. It can essentially be used to get past some enemy checkpoints, ease extraction of prisoners, or to make a hasty escape, but crash one of these to an obstacle and it will attract the attention of nearby patrol. We've already seen a number of transportation methods through the various footage released thus far, but GameInformer confirmed that players can even steal tanks and use them against enemies. Hell yes. After discussing gameplay, the article talked about Ground Zeroes' story. Those who've been keeping up with Metal Gear Solid 5 and its trailers shouldn't find any of this information all that surprising, but for those who really want to avoid any kind of spoilers possible, click on the annotated button to skip this section. So we all know how Ground Zeroes begins, but it has always been unclear how and when Mother Base is attacked. The article clarified that the attack on Mother Base occurs shortly after both Chico and Paz are rescued. Paz is found with a stitched, V-shaped cut, and once brought into the chopper for extraction, the men had no choice but to begin unstitching the wound and operate without anesthetics, fearing the worst. After the stitches are removed, the doctor commands Snake and Chico to keep her guts in, and then proceeds to plunge his hands into her stomach to extract a bomb placed by the Patriots, who anticipated Snake's rescue. When the group tries to contact Mother Base after their discovery, they find out that the line is dead, and by the time the chopper returns, Mother Base is in flames. It turned out that the UN inspection that MSF was expecting had been a Trojan horse, aka a means to infiltrate Mother Base and take it down from within. Snake lands the chopper, but unfortunately only has enough time to rescue his second-in-command, Kaz Miller, before Mother Base crashes into the sea. By this time, Paz comes to, and Kaz immediately begins to curse her out, blaming her for the attack. But then they would learn that the Patriots intended for Snake to find the bomb within her body, with a contingency plan in place. The article then speaks of one more attack following the one on Mother Base, likely on Snake and Kaz, and this final attack is the one that leads to Snake's coma. Details of this attack were not spoiled, thankfully. After talking about these story details on a side paragraph, the article then talked a bit about Snake's new voice, describing it as similar to getting used to a new James Bond. It's jarring at first, but becomes natural after some time. The blurb also commented on Kiefer's performance, stating that he does a wonderful job of conveying the hero while adding a layer of emotion absent from Hader's one-tone growling. It's good to know that players with an open mind will not be disappointed. What may disappoint players is how short Ground Zeroes is. GameInformer completed the core story mission in just under 2 hours. Even worse is the fact that internal testers managed to speedrun through the main mission in just 5 minutes after skipping all the cutscenes and learning every nook and cranny. However, the game's side ops and the various challenges and ranks that they offer do add a decent amount of replayability. Ground Zeroes also features a console-exclusive extra op, with the PlayStation versions featuring the Deja Vu mission and the Xbox versions featuring the Jamais Vu mission. The former essentially allows players to play as a high-def version of the low-polygon Solid Snake from the original Metal Gear Solid within a Shadow Moses-esque Camp Omega, while the latter allows players to play as Raiden in an action-packed mission whose objective is to kill Snatchers, although unfortunately Raiden won't be using his iconic katana. To unlock the extra op, players have to collect the Zoff patches that Skullface throws away at the beginning of the game. Sounds a bit tedious, but hey, the more incentive the game gives players to keep playing it, the better. On a brighter note, the article confirmed the obvious. The game looks absolutely gorgeous, especially during the daylight. An interesting detail is that they have found that the PlayStation 4 version looks slightly better than the Xbox One, and Kojima himself actually stated this to be true. This is likely due to the PlayStation 4's more powerful hardware. Now let's move on to the Phantom Pain story. The article began by giving a premise that we are all relatively familiar with by now, but one interesting bit is the mention of the enemy force known as those who don't exist. Within the force, the article described haunting figures like a flaming Vulcan, but most intriguing of all is that they confirm that the child within the gas mask is indeed Psycho Mantis. While I personally had little to no doubt in my mind about this, it's good to finally get confirmation. GameInformer also managed to extract a few tidbits of information about the Phantom Pain story. As far as us Metal Gear fans know, the Les Enfants Terribles project, the one that resulted in the creation of Solid, Liquid, and Solid Snake, took place between Portable Ops and Peace Walker. Thus far, it is accounted that in 1972, Big Boss fell into a coma from battle, and Zero used this opportunity to extract his genes and create the sons of Big Boss. This was the last straw that drove Big Boss away from the Patriots and led to the creation of Peace Walker's MSF. However, GameInformer's interview with Kojima seemed to suggest that things are not as they seem. When asked about Big Boss's coma and the Les Enfants Terribles project, Kojima stated that there's only once when Big Boss is in a coma prior to the establishment of Outer Heaven, even despite the fact that the lore seems to account for 2 comas, the one in 1972, 2 years before Peace Walker, and the one in 1975 during Ground Zeroes. Thankfully, Kojima assures that the Phantom Pain will explain this discrepancy and give more insight into the Les Enfants Terribles project, and that everything will come together by the end of the Phantom Pain, answering many questions that fans of the franchise have had about the timeline. Speaking of timeline, the article actually featured its own version of Metal Gear's timeline, revealing an interesting detail about Big Boss's new mercenary group, Diamond Dogs. The timeline essentially clarified that the group itself is called Diamond Dogs, but the base that players will be managing is called Outer Heaven, the same way that in Peace Walker, the group itself was called MSF, while the base was called Mother Base. In other words, the base that players control over the course of the Phantom Pain is the exact one that Solid Snake will infiltrate in 1995, which means there's a good chance that we'll be seeing at least a glimpse of young Solid Snake to bridge the gap between Big Boss's saga and Solid Snake's saga. In fact, when asked about whether the Phantom Pain would indeed bridge the gap, Kojima coyly dodged eye contact with the interviewee and refused to say anything in fear of spoiling anything. Seems like players have a lot to look forward to on the story front. Something else to note is that the base being Outer Heaven means that one region that players will have access to is South Africa, since that is the country in which Outer Heaven is established. Anyways, after talking about the story, Kojima moved on to talk about the various physical changes that Big Boss undergoes throughout the Phantom Pain, like the prosthetic arm and the horn. He stated that his goal is to show how one comes back from war. He wanted to depict that surviving a war doesn't mean one returns unscathed, and that the pain of an injury, lost limb, or a lost comrade or superior does remain. This theme falls right in line with the title, The Phantom Pain, which not only signifies the lurking pain on a missing limb, but also the lurking pain from a lost comrade. It's both a physical and emotional phantom pain. The article then proceeded to talk about the gameplay demo they saw of The Phantom Pain, which showcased the Afghanistan open world from the E3 trailer. Once again, the article complimented the Fox Engine's graphical capabilities, noting the impressive draw distance, sharp textures and models, and little details like wild plants and animals that help bring the world to life. Afghanistan by itself was noted to be much larger than Camp Omega, and this is just one of many locations. Speaking of open worlds, it's important to note that the Phantom Pain is not one giant massive world, but rather a collection of open sandboxes in different parts of the world, each accessible from the game's main hub, Outer Heaven. And with all its worlds combined, Kojima confirmed that the Phantom Pain will physically be around 200 times bigger than Ground Zeroes, which is a pretty impressive number. Kojima then proceeded to compare and contrast the Phantom Pain and Ground Zeroes. Controls will be similar, but how players navigate will be different. In Ground Zeroes, due to its smaller map size and the fact that all of it is a hostile area, players are under constant pressure to stay hidden. Furthermore, players can't simply go outside the base without having to be fully extracted via chopper, since the entirety of Ground Zeroes' map is technically the base. But in the Phantom Pain, worlds will feature a combination of bases along with areas outside of bases as well, allowing players to take a breather, plan ahead, choose when to engage and when to back out or run away. The article then proceeded by talking about base building and management. It confirmed that the base players will be building is indeed none other than Outer Heaven from Metal Gear 1, and that more evidence comes from one of Ground Zeroes' timeline bullet point shown after its completion, stating that an underground nuclear testing facility was abandoned by the South African government in 1977. I wouldn't be surprised if this abandoned facility becomes the starting point of Outer Heaven. The article also mentioned the return of the Fulton recovery system, which allowed players to recruit soldiers quickly in Peace Walker. Even better news is that the Phantom Pain's base management system will be much more interactive than in Peace Walker, allowing players to actually walk around the base they have created. In fact, players will even be able to take advantage of the game's online capabilities to walk around their friends' bases. This could possibly mean that players will have more control and customization options over Outer Heaven's physical appearance. Otherwise, what would be the point of visiting someone else's base, right? The prospect is certainly exciting. Finally, for gameplay, Kojima talked about how Ground Zeroes save files will transfer over to the Phantom Pain. Apart from little things like game records and score, players can also transfer over prisoners that they have rescued from Ground Zeroes. Kojima couldn't say much else, but he confidently stated that players who do play Ground Zeroes before the Phantom Pain will have a clear advantage over those who don't. And that, ladies and gentlemen, sums up everything you need to know about Metal Gear Solid 5 from GameInformer's latest issue. My passion for the Metal Gear franchise and my hype for both Ground Zeroes and the Phantom Pain have been reinvigorated thanks to GameInformer's article, and I hope this video did the same for you. To spread the word about this awesome new information, be sure to share this video with your friends and acquaintances, and to be further updated on Metal Gear Solid 5, be sure to join the NASIAN and subscribe to Young Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Thank you very much, and Young out!